The call came through at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night while I was 3 levels underground at the Pentagon, shoulder deep in classified server racks, trying to stop a coordinated cyber attack that was costing our national defense systems $45,000 per hour. My secure phone buzzed against my hip. I ignored it. Then it buzzed again. I pulled off my work gloves and checked the encrypted display. Wesley Coleman, my direct supervisor at Defense Solutions Corp., calling from his condo in Arlington at what should be dinner time with his yoga instructor girlfriend. I almost didn't answer. When you're managing a security breach that's compromising military communications across 3 time zones, phone calls from corporate feel less urgent than the blinking threat indicators in front of you. But I answered anyway because that's what 22 years of being a reliable crisis manager conditions you to do. Morrison speaking. Hank, it's Wesley. I need to inform you of a company decision. Effective immediately, we no longer require your services as Senior Defense Security Architect. Your employment is terminated as of today. I looked at the threat console in front of me. Alert code Red Dawn active, still flashing across multiple screens. Database intrusion attempts showing 1,247 failed authentication probes in the last 8 minutes. 3 separate military communication networks completely isolated due to our emergency lockdown protocols. Barbara Stevens, Pentagon Operations Coordinator, standing 10 feet away, looking at me with the kind of desperate hope you see when someone realizes their entire mission depends on one person who actually understands these 25-year-old legacy defense systems. I understand, I said, keeping my voice level. I'll inform Barbara that Defense Solutions will be handling the breach response procedures for the crisis I'm currently managing. Silence long enough that I thought the secure connection might have dropped. What crisis? The coordinated cyber attack that brought me to the Pentagon at 4 p.m. yesterday. 3 military networks are in full lockdown. The breach is costing approximately $45,000 per hour in communications downtime and operational delays. I'm in the middle of tracing the intrusion through 20-year-old mainframe protocols that predate most of your current staff. I assume you'll want to send someone else to complete the trace work since I no longer work for Defense Solutions. More silence. I could hear him breathing through the encrypted line. Hank, let's discuss this after you've resolved the Pentagon situation. I don't think that's appropriate. You just terminated my employment. I shouldn't be working on Defense Solutions projects if I'm no longer a Defense Solutions employee. I'll brief Barbara on what I've discovered so far and catch the next shuttle back to Virginia. Or actually not back to the office since you said not to bother returning. Wait, Hank, let me call you back. He ended the call before I could respond. My name is Harold Morrison. Everyone calls me Hank. I'm 54 years old, and I just got fired while managing a cybersecurity crisis that nobody else at my company knows how to solve. At 54, I thought I had maybe 10 good working years left before thinking about retirement, and maybe that cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains my late wife Sarah always wanted to buy. I thought I'd built enough reputation and expertise to coast into my golden years with respect and security. That phone call changed everything, and maybe it was time. Emily's tuition bill was sitting on my kitchen table back in Alexandria. $18,500 due in 6 weeks for her junior year at Virginia Tech. Sarah had made me promise before she died that Emily would graduate debt-free, that our daughter wouldn't start her adult life carrying the burden of student loans like we did. Corporate loyalty wasn't going to pay that bill. Expertise might. Before I explain what happened over the next 72 hours, let me establish who I am and why that phone call was the most expensive mistake Wesley Coleman ever made. I joined the Navy right out of high school in 1988, spent 8 years in IT security, learned computer systems when they still used vacuum tubes and punch cards. Back then, cybersecurity meant physical locks and clearance badges. When I got out in 1996, the internet was just becoming a thing, and defense contractors were realizing that their old computer systems weren't going anywhere anytime soon. Defense Solutions hired me in 2002 as a network security engineer specializing in legacy military systems. My job was troubleshooting complex security breaches in systems that younger engineers didn't understand and couldn't fix. When a military installation got hacked and their IT department couldn't trace the intrusion, they called Defense Solutions. Defense Solutions sent me. Over 22 years, I'd responded to 312 security emergencies across 15 states and 4 overseas installations. I'd traced advanced persistent threats, diagnosed insider attack vectors, identified zero-day vulnerabilities, and stopped data exfiltration attempts that could have compromised operational security for thousands of service members. I'd worked through hurricanes, holidays, and family emergencies. I missed Emily's high school graduation to fix a breach at Norfolk Naval Base. I spent my 50th birthday in a server room at Fort Bragg debugging assembly code while Sarah celebrated alone at home. That was before the cancer diagnosis. Before I learned that loyalty to your employer means nothing when you need time for chemotherapy appointments and hospice care. Sarah died 3 years ago. Emily's 20 now, junior at Virginia Tech, studying computer science like her old man. She's the only family I have left, and her education isn't negotiable. Sarah used to say I was too valuable to let one company control my future. She'd grown up watching her father work 30 years for the same steel company, believing loyalty would guarantee security. When they got bought out, they eliminated his pension and laid him off at 58. Nobody looks out for you except you, Hank, she'd tell me during those long nights at the hospital. Build something that's yours, not theirs. Most importantly, I developed deep knowledge of legacy military communication protocols that most of the defense industry still runs on, but nobody teaches anymore. Every installation had unique implementations. Every system had custom modifications. Every security model had quirks that existed only in my experience-based understanding of how those systems behaved under attack. That knowledge was what made me valuable. That knowledge was also what Wesley Coleman had just eliminated from Defense Solutions' crisis response capability at the worst possible moment. The Pentagon crisis had started 31 hours earlier. Fort Belvoir, Norfolk Naval Base, and Quantico had all reported sophisticated intrusion attempts targeting their communication relay systems within 2 hours of each other. All three installations used similar legacy mainframe architectures. All three were experiencing identical attack patterns. This was the kind of coordinated attack that kept defense professionals awake at night. Someone with serious resources and deep technical knowledge was systematically probing the backbone of military communications infrastructure. Not some script kiddie trying to steal personnel files. This was nation-state level sophistication. Defense Solutions' standard protocol was remote diagnostics first. I spent 6 hours on secure video calls with each installation's security teams, walking them through trace procedures and reviewing intrusion logs. By midnight Wednesday, I determined this wasn't something that could be resolved remotely. The attack pattern suggested someone with deep knowledge of military communication protocols was systematically probing for vulnerabilities in 25-year-old code that most people assumed was too classified to be worth attacking. They were wrong. Old code isn't automatically secure code. It's just code that nobody remembers how to fix when it breaks. I took the metro to Pentagon City Thursday morning, arriving at the secure entrance at 6 a.m. Barbara Stevens met me at the security checkpoint. She looked like she hadn't slept in 3 days, which she probably hadn't. "Mr. Morrison, thank you for coming. We've been in communications lockdown for 26 hours. CENTCOM is asking why we can't secure our own systems. Because this attack pattern is targeting vulnerabilities that require hands-on mainframe access to properly trace. I need to examine the communication protocols directly." She led me to the secure data center. 4 floors of humming mainframe computers, each one processing thousands of military communications per minute when they weren't locked down due to security breaches. All silent now, all offline, all costing the Pentagon approximately $15,000 per hour in operational delays. This was the kind of place that reminded me why I got into this business. These weren't just computers. They were the nervous system of American military operations. Every order, every intelligence report, every personnel communication flowed through systems like these. When they went down, missions got delayed and people got put at risk. I spent the next 9 hours tracing the attack through system logs, identifying the exact communication subroutines the hackers were targeting, and mapping their intrusion methodology. This wasn't some random cyber vandalism. This was sophisticated, methodical, and expensive. Someone had invested serious money in understanding exactly how these old systems worked and where their weak points were. By 6 p.m., I'd moved between all 3 installations, finding identical attack patterns across every compromised system. The hackers weren't just hitting random military targets. They were specifically targeting installations that still used the legacy communication protocols I'd helped design back in the late 1990s when I was still learning this job. By 10:30 p.m. Thursday, I'd isolated the vulnerability. The hackers were exploiting a buffer overflow in legacy assembly code that handled encrypted military communications. The vulnerability existed in custom communication software that Defense Solutions had helped implement in 1999. I was part of the original development team. I was one of only 2 people who understood how that communication code worked. It's funny how technology works. We built these systems to last forever, and they did. But forever in computer terms means dealing with problems nobody anticipated 25 years later. The code we wrote in 1999 was rock solid for its time. We never imagined that hackers in 2024 would have the computing power and patience to probe for buffer overflows in assembly subroutines that processed maybe 500 communications per day back then, but now handled 50,000. Fixing it required patching 25-year-old assembly modules, updating mainframe security protocols, and implementing new input validation routines that would prevent similar attacks without breaking the military's existing communication systems. This wasn't like updating your smartphone. You couldn't just download a patch and restart. Every change had to be tested, validated, and implemented with surgical precision. One mistake, and you could freeze military communications for days during active operations. I estimated 14 to 18 hours of careful programming work across all 3 installations. It was the kind of work that required not just technical knowledge, but institutional memory. You had to understand not just how the code worked, but why it was written that way, what assumptions the original programmers made, and how those assumptions had changed over 2.5 decades. I started at 10:45 p.m. Thursday night. By 11:47 p.m., I was halfway through updating the first set of assembly modules when Wesley called and told me I was fired. After Wesley hung up, Barbara approached me cautiously. You could see the panic starting to set in as she processed what she'd just overheard. "Mr. Morrison, is everything all right? You look concerned. I just got terminated by my employer while in the middle of securing your communication systems." Her expression went from concern to horrified. In her world, military communications didn't just shut down for maintenance. Every hour these systems stayed down was compromising operational readiness and putting service members at risk. Terminated. "But you're the only person who understands our legacy protocols. What happens to our systems?" "That's an excellent question. Defense Solutions will need to send someone else to complete the work." "How long will that take?" "The other engineer who understands these communication protocols is Timothy Brooks. He's in Germany managing a NATO contract. Defense Solutions might have to wait until he becomes available." "How long?" "Timothy's European engagement is scheduled for another 12 days, plus travel time." Barbara's face went white. I could see her doing the math in her head. "We can't wait 12 days. Every day offline compromises operational communications and mission readiness. 12 days would put active operations at risk. Then I suggest you contact Defense Solutions Corporate and explain the urgency." At 1:15 a.m., my phone rang again. This time, it was Roger Adams, Defense Solutions Chief Operating Officer. Roger had been with the company for 16 years and understood exactly how critical my role was to military crisis management. He was also smart enough to realize that Wesley had just made a catastrophic error in judgment. "Hank, I just got off the phone with Wesley. There's been a misunderstanding about your employment status. We need you to complete the Pentagon engagement before we discuss any personnel matters." "Roger," Wesley was very clear. He said, "My employment was terminated effective immediately. That's not a misunderstanding, that's termination." I could hear the desperation creeping into his voice. Roger understood the implications in a way that Wesley obviously didn't. This wasn't just about one disgruntled employee. This was about Defense Solutions' entire reputation in the military contracting industry. "I understand this is confusing, but let's focus on resolving the communications crisis first. We can address your employment situation after you've secured the systems." "I don't think that's appropriate. If I'm terminated, I shouldn't be working on Defense Solutions projects. If I'm not terminated, then Wesley needs to call me back and clarify that he made an error. This is a critical national security situation. These communication systems are essential for military operations. We need you to complete the security patches. Then you need to clarify my employment status first." "Am I a Defense Solutions employee or not?" Long pause. I could hear Roger thinking through the implications. If he said I was still employed, he'd be contradicting Wesley's termination and creating internal political problems. If he said I was terminated, he'd be admitting that Defense Solutions had just eliminated their crisis response capability in the middle of their most expensive emergency. "Hank, let me conference in Wesley so we can resolve this together." "I'd rather you didn't." Wesley was clear about his decision. "I'm respecting that decision by no longer working on Defense Solutions projects. If the Pentagon needs assistance, they should contact Defense Solutions Emergency Response Line and request another engineer. There is no other engineer available who understands these legacy military systems. That's an unfortunate situation, but it's not my problem anymore. Since I'm no longer a Defense Solutions employee, I ended the call. Barbara was standing nearby, having heard my side of the conversation. The weight of the situation was settling on her shoulders. At my age, I'd seen this look before. The moment when someone in management realizes they're completely dependent on something they don't understand and can't control. What should we do? Mr. Morrison, you should contact Defense Solutions and request emergency engineering support. Explain the urgency of the situation. They'll prioritize getting someone here as quickly as possible, but you're here now. You understand our systems. You were in the middle of fixing the vulnerability. Can't you just complete the work? I thought about that carefully. Back when I was younger, you'd finish the job regardless of company politics because it was the right thing to do. But I'd learned something important over 22 years in corporate America and 8 years in the Navy. Honor has to go both ways. I'd given Defense Solutions my best years, missed family time, worked through Sarah's illness, and built their reputation one crisis at a time. The moment it became convenient, they threw me away like broken equipment. Emily's tuition was due in 6 weeks. My mortgage wasn't going to pay itself. Corporate loyalty is a luxury I couldn't afford anymore. I was fired 89 minutes ago. I can't ethically continue working on a project for a company that just terminated my employment. What if we hired you directly? Not through Defense Solutions, but as an independent consultant working for the Pentagon. Now, that was interesting. I'd never considered going independent. But at 54, maybe it was time to think about options beyond the corporate ladder. Sarah had always said I was too valuable to let one company control my future. She'd grown up watching her father work 35 years for a steel company, only to get laid off 8 months before retirement. That would create contractual complications. The Pentagon has security agreements with Defense Solutions. Those agreements probably have exclusivity provisions preventing you from hiring outside consultants to work on Defense Solutions-designed systems. I'll check our contracts. She made several phone calls, had quick conversations that involved a lot of technical terms and urgent whispers, then looked at me with cautious optimism. Our legal team says the security agreement has exclusivity provisions for routine maintenance, but emergency patches can be conducted by any qualified consultant if Defense Solutions cannot provide timely support. They're defining timely support as within 24 hours of request. That was the opening I needed, not just to solve this immediate crisis, but to test whether there was a future beyond Defense Solutions. At 54, I was too old to start over at another company, but maybe not too old to start working for myself. Have you formally requested emergency support from Defense Solutions? She sent an encrypted email to Defense Solutions Emergency Response Team, copying me, formally requesting immediate engineering support for the military communications breach and noting that the previous engineer, me, was no longer available to complete the patchwork. She marked it urgent and requested response within 6 hours. At 3:45 a.m., we received a response from Defense Solutions Emergency Coordinator that told us everything we needed to know about how this was going to play out. We acknowledge your request for emergency engineering support. Our senior security architects are currently committed to other client emergencies. We are working to identify available resources and will provide an estimated response timeline within 8 hours. 8 hours. In corporate speak, that meant they had no idea how to solve this problem without me, but they weren't ready to admit it yet. Roger was probably spending his Friday morning calling every contractor and consultant he could find, trying to locate someone who understood military communication protocols well enough to not make the crisis worse. Barbara showed me the email with the kind of desperate expression you see on people who are watching their career go down in flames through no fault of their own. What does this mean? It means Defense Solutions doesn't have anyone available to send. Timothy is in Germany, and apparently nobody else at Defense Solutions has the expertise to handle military communication vulnerabilities. So we wait unless you want to exercise your contract provision and hire an independent consultant. Are you available as an independent consultant? This was the moment. At 54, after 22 years of corporate life, I was being offered the chance to work for myself, to set my own rates, choose my own projects, and never again have to worry about some young manager deciding my expertise was too expensive. Sarah had been right. This wasn't a crisis, it was an opportunity. I could be What would your rate structure look like? I thought about that carefully. Independent consulting rates for emergency cybersecurity work typically range from $180 to $300 per hour, depending on expertise level and urgency. I was at the top of the expertise scale, and this was definitely urgent. But more than that, I was the only person available who could solve this problem. That kind of scarcity has value: $235 per hour for emergency security work, minimum 24-hour engagement to ensure complete vulnerability patching and system validation. That's $5,640 total, payment terms minus 50% deposit before I resume work, remaining 50% upon successful system restoration. Barbara didn't even blink. When your military communications are down and you're facing congressional hearings about national security failures, $5,640 for a solution starts looking like a bargain. Done. I'll have our contracting office process the deposit immediately. The contracting process took until Friday evening. Government paperwork, even in emergencies, moves at government speed, but by 6:30 p.m. Friday, my secure phone chimed with a bank transfer notification. $2,820 had just cleared into my personal checking account. More money than I'd ever received for a single day's work in my entire career. At 7 p.m. Friday, I resumed work on the communication security patches, but now I was working for myself. The funny thing about doing the same work as an independent consultant instead of a corporate employee is how different it feels. Every line of code I wrote was billable. Every problem I solved was building my reputation instead of someone else's company. Every decision was mine to make. For the first time in 22 years, I wasn't just fixing someone else's crisis. I was building my own future. Building something for Emily's education. Building something Sarah would have been proud of. By Saturday afternoon, I'd completed the vulnerability fixes across all 3 military installations. The work went faster than I'd expected because I wasn't dealing with corporate approval processes or having to document every decision for managers who wouldn't understand the technical details anyway. By Saturday evening, I'd updated the security protocols and conducted full system testing. By Sunday morning, all 3 installations were back online with no security vulnerabilities and no communication processing errors. Total lockdown time, 42 hours. Total operational impact, approximately $1.89 million. But the systems were secure and the patches I'd implemented would prevent similar communication-based attacks in the future. More importantly, I'd just proven to myself that I didn't need defense solutions. They needed me. Barbara was watching the communication monitors with visible relief as encrypted traffic began processing normally again. The green lights were beautiful, each one representing thousands of military communications that had been frozen for nearly 2 days, finally flowing through the system like they were supposed to. Mr. Morrison, I cannot thank you enough. You saved us from a disaster that would have been catastrophically worse if we'd waited for Defense Solutions to send another engineer. You're welcome. I'll prepare a technical report documenting the vulnerability, attack methodology, and patch procedures. You should share that with Defense Solutions so they can update their security documentation. At 9:30 p.m. Sunday night, I received a call from Roger Adams. I was back at my apartment in Alexandria, exhausted but satisfied with the weekend's work. More than satisfied, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Pride in work that was entirely mine. Hank, I understand you completed the military security work as an independent consultant. We need to discuss your employment status. Wesley's decision to terminate you was premature. We'd like to offer you reinstatement with full back pay and benefits. I appreciate that, but I'm declining. I'm now operating as an independent consultant. It's more lucrative and I have better control over which projects I accept. What does that mean for Defense Solutions? You're our most experienced legacy systems expert. It means Defense Solutions will need to develop other engineers with similar expertise or accept that your crisis response capability is significantly reduced. The truth was, at 54, I'd finally learned what my father never had the chance to figure out. He worked 28 years for the same manufacturing company, believing that loyalty and hard work would guarantee security. When the company got bought out, they eliminated his pension and laid him off at 56. He spent his last 9 working years bouncing between temporary jobs, never again finding the security he'd thought he'd earned. I wasn't going to make his mistake. Not with Emily counting on me. That's not acceptable. We have ongoing client emergencies that require your specific knowledge. Then Defense Solutions should have considered that before terminating me while I was literally in the middle of managing one of those emergencies. Hank, I understand you're upset about how Wesley handled the situation. I'm not upset, Roger. I'm simply making rational business decisions based on new information. Wesley demonstrated that Defense Solutions doesn't value my contributions enough to avoid terminating me during a crisis. I've learned from that demonstration. The next morning, I called Emily at Virginia Tech. She was between classes, grabbing coffee at the student union, probably stressing about her upcoming midterms and wondering how we were going to manage her tuition payment in 5 weeks. Dad, is everything okay? You never call on Monday mornings. Everything's fine, sweetheart. Actually, everything's better than fine. I have some news about your tuition. Her voice got tight. The way it always did when money came up, Emily knew exactly how much her education cost and exactly how hard I worked to pay for it. What kind of news? The good kind. I just finished a consulting project that paid more in 1 weekend than I used to make in 2 months. Your tuition is covered, and you don't need to worry about student loans. Silence for a moment, then I heard her voice crack slightly. Dad, what happened? You sound different. I got fired Thursday night while I was fixing a Pentagon security breach that was costing the military $45,000 per hour. Oh no, Dad, I'm so sorry. Do you need me to come home? I can take a semester off, get a job. No, Emily. That's exactly what you're not going to do, because getting fired turned out to be the best thing that could have happened to my career. I told her about the independent consulting work, about the Pentagon contract, about the other opportunities that were already starting to come in. I told her about the freedom of working for myself, setting my own rates, choosing projects that mattered. You know what your mother used to say? Nobody looks out for you except you. It took me 22 years to understand what she meant. Mom would be proud of you, Dad. She always said you were too valuable to work for just one company. That's exactly what she said. I should have listened sooner. Over the next 8 weeks, I received 9 emergency calls from military installations and defense contractors experiencing security crises. Each call followed the same pattern. Sophisticated attack on legacy systems, Defense Solutions couldn't respond quickly enough. Could I help as an independent consultant? I helped all 9 clients. Total consulting revenue, $98,000 for 8 weeks of work. That was more than I'd made in the previous 11 months at Defense Solutions. Word spreads fast in the defense security industry. By October, I was receiving calls from installations that had never worked with Defense Solutions, asking if I was available for security audits and ongoing vulnerability consulting. These weren't emergency calls. They were military facilities that wanted to prevent emergencies by having someone who understood their legacy systems before problems occurred. By December, I had 6 long-term consulting contracts with defense installations who wanted guaranteed access to my communication expertise when they needed it. Combined retainer revenue, $1,500 monthly, approximately $150,000 annually, plus additional project fees. In January, Defense Solutions formally offered me a consulting arrangement, $235 per hour for active security work, $2,000 monthly retainer for availability and consultation, 8-month contract renewable at my discretion. I accepted because it was guaranteed revenue, and Defense Solutions represented one of the most reliable sources of emergency work. Wesley Coleman lasted until February. The board terminated him after they calculated that his decision to fire me during the Pentagon crisis had cost Defense Solutions approximately $385,000 in lost client contracts, emergency recovery costs, and consulting fees they were now paying me instead of employing me directly. The irony wasn't lost on me. They were now paying me more in 8 months than they'd paid me in 3 years as an employee. I stayed independent. By late 2024, I was managing 9 long-term consulting relationships with defense installations across the East Coast. Annual revenue was approaching $285,000. I was working approximately 60% of the hours I'd worked at Defense Solutions while earning nearly 3 times my previous salary. More importantly, I was valued. When clients called me for security crises, they understood they were paying premium rates for premium expertise. Nobody questioned whether my approach was worth the investment. They'd all seen what happened when they tried to solve legacy system vulnerabilities without specialized knowledge, but the real change wasn't financial. It was psychological. For the first time in my career, I wasn't worried about layoffs, corporate restructuring, or some new manager deciding I was too expensive. My security came from my expertise, not from someone else's decision about whether to keep me around. Emily and I started talking about things we'd never been able to plan before. Maybe that cabin in the Blue Ridge Mountains Sarah always wanted. Maybe helping Emily with a down payment on her first house after graduation instead of worrying about student loans. Maybe taking that trip to Ireland to see where Sarah's family came from. Emily's spring semester tuition was paid in full by January. No loans, no stress, no sleepless nights wondering how we'd manage. When she called to thank me, her voice was different, lighter. Dad, I can actually focus on my studies instead of worrying about money. You gave me something Mom always wanted, the freedom to learn without financial pressure. That's what parents are supposed to do, sweetheart. Build something better for their children than what they had themselves. At 54, I thought my career was winding down. Instead, it was just getting started. Here's what I learned from the entire experience. The most dangerous employee to fire isn't the one who complains about salary or threatens to quit. It's the one who's literally in the middle of solving a crisis that nobody else knows how to solve when you decide they're expendable. Because when you fire that person, you don't just lose their future contributions, you lose their ability to prevent the immediate disaster that's happening right now. And you discover that replacing specialized expertise during an emergency is impossible. Wesley wanted to reduce headcount and eliminate what he saw as an expensive senior engineer. He got exactly what he wanted. I was eliminated, but my expertise wasn't eliminated. It just got a lot more expensive. These days, you have to take care of yourself. The security you build through your own skills and reputation is the only security that nobody can take away from you. The best part, I'm not angry anymore. How can you be angry when someone's mistake turns out to be the best thing that ever happened to your career? Sometimes the best revenge isn't proving people wrong. It's letting them experience the full cost of being right about what they wanted. Wesley wanted me gone. I was gone. Then he got to explain to his executives why the company's most critical client crisis was costing an additional $235 per hour because the engineer who could fix it was no longer employed. At 54, I finally learned what my father never had the chance to figure out. Your value isn't determined by what one company is willing to pay you. It's determined by what the market will pay for what you know how to do, and sometimes the market values that knowledge a lot more than your employer ever did. Getting fired at 54 wasn't the end of my career. It was the beginning of understanding what my career was actually worth.